all of us are welcome here. All are welcome in this place. Let's dream together of the day when earth and heaven are one. A city built of love and light, the new Jerusalem, where our morning turns to dancing, every creature lifts its voice, crying, welcome, welcome to this place. You're invited to come and know God's grace. All are welcome, the love of God to share, 'cause all of us are welcome here. All are welcome in this place. Shine, fill this land with the Father's glory. Blaze, Spirit, blaze, set our hearts on fire. Flow, river, flow, flood the nations with grace and mercy. Send forth your word, Lord, and let there be light. Of your love is shining in the midst of the darkness shining. Jesus, light of the world, shine upon us. Set us free by the truth you now bring us. Shine on me, shine on me. Shine, Jesus, shine, fill this land with the Father's glory. Blaze, Spirit, blaze, set our hearts on fire. Flow, river, flow, flood the nations with grace and mercy. Send forth your word, Lord, and let there be light. Lord, I come to your awesome presence, from the shadows to your radiance. By the blood I have entered your brightness. Search me, try me, consume all my darkness. Shine on me, shine on me. Shine, Jesus, shine, fill this land with the Father's glory. Blaze, Spirit, blaze, set our hearts on fire. Flow, river, flow, flood the nations with grace and mercy. Send forth your word, Lord, and let there be light. As we gaze on your kingly brightness, so our faces display your likeness, ever changing from glory to glory. Mirrored here, may our lives tell your story. Shine on me, shine on me. Shine, Jesus, shine, fill this land with the Father's glory. Blaze, Spirit, blaze, set our hearts on fire. Flow, river, flow, flood the and glory, God of time and space. When we feel the future, give to us your grace. In the midst of changing ways, give us still the grace to praise. Many gifts, one Spirit, one love known in many ways. In our differences, blessing from diversity we praise. One giver, one Lord, one Spirit, one word, known in many ways, hallowing our days. For the giver, for the gifts, praise, praise, praise. Men of many colors, God of many signs, you have made us different, blessing many kinds. As the old ways disappear, let your love cast out our fear. Many gifts, one Spirit, one love known in many ways. In our differences, blessing from diversity we praise. One giver, one Lord, one Spirit, one word, known in many ways, hallowing our days. For the giver, for the gifts, praise, praise, praise. Freshness of the morning, newness of each night, you are still creating endless love and light. As we see as shadows part, many gifts from one great heart. Many gifts, one Spirit, one love known in many ways. In our differences, blessing from diversity we praise. One giver, one Lord, one Spirit, one word, known in many ways, hallowing our days. For the giver, for the gifts, praise, praise, praise.
Good morning and welcome to worship at Christ Church. I'm Lee Kemp. I'm on the worship team and I'm your treasurer. So welcome again. Our band members this morning, the music was just beautiful. Our tech team upstairs, good job. And hi to all the streamers. Just a few things about our worship. We do a couple things differently. Our collection plates are in the back there, and there's one up here. We don't do a formal collection of offering. So please place your offering at any time during the service. Our restrooms are out here to the right, my right, your left, as you're facing the front. And that way. And if you keep going, after service is a coffee hour out there, and make a right-hand turn. So, with those things out of the way, I think that's everything. I'd like to start with get back into our worship mode, which the singing helps us get into, with the call to worship. Dave, can you put the picture up? Okay. So, this is a picture from Facebook. I get some silly reminders from Facebook about memories I have. I'm sure you all get them. Like 2 years ago, I won a prize on Cookie Jam. I think many people play that. You get these little reminders, oh, I got a prize. So sometimes I just ignore them or I even delete them. But I thought I'd take a peek this time, and I was surprised with a happy memory. This picture of my grandkids and daughter-in-law playing hide in a box to jump out and surprise me. The kids were surprising me, but then they wanted to keep on surprising me. I had to go out, pretend to come back in, so they could surprise me again several times, and I finally got a picture. Everybody who came in had their turn to be surprised too. And one of the nicest surprises when it popped up on my You Have Memories to Look Back On Today in Facebook, because this is from 3 years ago, and I had forgotten about how much fun this was. I was a surprised grandmother. A simple box and that sometimes annoying Facebook reminder turned out to be a surprise and very different from what I thought. So today, during worship, listen for some surprises in the probably very familiar story of Ruth. So now at this time, I'd like everybody to, if you feel comfortable, stand up and pass the peace of Jesus to your neighbors. And peace be with you all this morning. Thank you.
As you begin to take your seats, I've asked Nancy to tell our Bible story today in the way that she would as if she were addressing a group of kids or as a campfire story. I know that has been your theme for the summer. I believe the wood that was sitting up here is currently, or by now has been consumed by the fire that Paul Morano is having up on his island in Lake George. So we'll hope that sustained them and kept them warm at least for a little while. But I want you to imagine this. This story really is a tale, I'm sure, that was told around campfires for a very, very long time. And Nancy is going to be the only one who kind of tells you more or less the full story, because I don't want to keep saying that same story over and over again. So I do ask you, it's kind of a children's time, but certainly I want you all to listen. It's not a time for you to tune out if that's what you do during children's time. Not that I'm saying you do, but I know that it happens. Okay, so I'm going to have Nancy's going to tell this story, and it's a story you've probably heard lots of times, but it's a reminder because then you're going to get more out of our scripture readers when they come up here later. And by the way, it's just great to hear. Glad to be here. Nancy.
Okay, is this turned on? Can you hear me? All right. We got big kids over here and we've got little kids over here, so I should go over there. Okay. Okay, now, Ruth is a little bitty book. Only 3 chapters in the Bible. It comes right after Judges. Don't bother looking for it. I'll be done telling the story by the time you find it. Okay, so in Israel, there was a famine. So this one husband takes his wife and his 2 sons and they go to a neighboring country because they've got food. Well, they settle in there and the husband dies. That's bad news. But the sons get married. They get married to, one of the wives' names was Orpah and one was Ruth. And then the sons die. So the poor mother is having a really rough time. Her name is Naomi. And she finally hears that there's food back home. So she says, okay, that does it. I'm packing up. I'm going home. Well, the 2 daughters-in-law say, us too. And they start to go with her. And she says, okay, you guys should go back to your own family, marry again, have kids, have a wonderful life. You've been so good to me. I want what's good for you. And they say, nope, not going. I guess they had a really good relationship with their mother-in-law. This is a good thing. And she said, look, even if I got pregnant tonight and had sons, you're going to wait for a couple of decades for them to be grown so you can marry them? This is not going to work. And Orpah says, okay, you're right. And she leaves, but she's crying as she leaves. And Naomi looks at Ruth and says, your sister-in-law's got the right idea, you know, you should go too. And Ruth says, don't ask me to leave you. Don't ask me to leave because wherever you're going, I'm going. Where you're staying, I'm staying. Your people are going to be my people, and your God will be my God. Where you die, I'm going to die. And if anything but death separates us, God is allowed to judge me for that. You don't argue with that. So they both came back to the town of Bethlehem. Bethlehem being a small little town, people are going, is that Naomi? Hey, did you say, is that really Naomi? Did she come back? It's been 10 years. Naomi says, don't call me Naomi anymore. It means pleasant. Call me Mara. I am so bitter. God has just loaded me down with problems. My husband, my son are gone. I don't see anything pleasant here. Well, they get there right at the time of the barley harvest. And they've got to eat. How are they going to do that? Well, what is Janet's phrase? Social net, the net for people who are poor at that time is the people who are harvesting don't harvest all the way to the edges of their field. So that people who are in situations like that can go and grab the barley and the grain and eat that way. So Ruth goes into this one field and she's picking up the dropped grain. It's still on the stalk. You know, so she's got to carry all this. And she's doing this and working really hard. And the owner comes And he says to the guy in charge, who's that? Don't recognize her. And they said, oh, her name's Ruth. You know Naomi's daughter-in-law? She came all the way from Moab to be with her mother-in-law, and she has worked since the very beginning of this morning, just stopping once to rest. And Boaz says, wow, she really is a hard worker. And he goes to his people that are working there and says, hey, do me a favor, drop some extra. Don't give her any grief. Just leave a little extra for her so she can have some more food. And he goes to Ruth and says, you know, you are so good. I want you to pick only in my fields. Don't go out to other fields. I've already told everybody not to pick on you. And when you're thirsty, come over here, get the water that you need, and help yourself. And Ruth is going, thank you. You don't know me. Why are you being so nice to me? And he said, listen, small town again. I've heard everything that you've done for Naomi, and I'm really impressed, and I want you to do well. So come every day, and while you're here, come on over and have lunch with us. So he's inviting her to meet people that way so she doesn't feel so lonely. And then she gets all this comes back, and she didn't even eat all her lunch. She saved some of her lunch and brought it back to Naomi and gives her the lunch, and she gets the grain, puts the grain down, and Naomi goes, whoa, good job, where were you? And she said, I was at Boaz's field. And a little light bulb goes off on Naomi and says, you know, he's a near relative of ours. Let's see what we could do. You know, maybe he could be our protector. Now, in those days, women alone were really in a bad situation. It was a male-dominated society. So, okay, she says, this is what we're going to do. They went and now, I should have brought in you know how some grass, when it gets long, it gets grain at the end of it? Well, they wanted to chop off the grain part and get rid of the long part. They probably fed the cows or the sheep that. But that's what they were doing. It's a process called winnowing. So that Boaz was doing that in his barn with all his workers, and they had a party afterwards because, you know, after you do a lot of work, sometimes you celebrate. And so Boaz goes and lays down, and Ruth's been instructed by her mother-in-law to take a bath, get dressed up, put on your best perfume. Seriously, it says ointment, it does, and go there. When he's asleep, she goes down and uncovers his feet. Now he's sleeping by himself, and she lays down, and Boaz wakes up in the middle of the night, and there's somebody there next to him. He's a little confused. He says, who are you? And she says, I'm Ruth. And could you please, versions are different. Some say, cover me with your cloak. Some say, hide, protect me under your wing. What she's basically asking is, can you marry me so I have some protection? And Boaz says, oh, bless you, my daughter. He does use daughter. He says, it's so wonderful that you came, you asked me, and you didn't go after the younger kids, the younger boys, whether they were rich or poor. So you can see there's an age gap there. But you know what? He was so nice to her. You think he's going to make a good husband? Being nice is a good thing to have in a husband, right, Ron? I got one of those. Boaz says, okay, now we can do this, but there's one catch. There's somebody that's a closer relation to your family, to Naomi's family, than me. So I got to talk to him about it. Now you just lay down and I'll deal with it tomorrow morning. So they both lay down. I don't think either one of them slept too much. I think Boaz was trying to figure out how this was, if this was going to work, if he was going to be able to marry Ruth or somebody else was. And I imagine Ruth was just really wondering what was going to happen and worried. And then in the morning, she goes back, but before she leaves, it says, well, it's still dark, so nobody knows she was there. Boaz says, give me your cloak. So he puts a lot of the grain in it. He says, I don't want you going back to your mother-in-law empty-handed. Again, we got a really kind guy here. So she goes back to Naomi, and Naomi probably didn't sleep at all last night either, because she's wondering what's going on. She says, oh, this is really good. He says he's taking care of it today, honey. He will. Type A personality. I married one of those too. So Boaz goes to the city gates, and he calls a bunch of 10 elders of the city. And he calls to the guy that's a closer relative and says, hey, I need to talk to you. And the guy comes over. He says, you know, Naomi's selling off her land that belonged to her husband and her sons. You want to buy it? Because if you don't, I will. And the guy says, sure. He says, you get the Moabite lady with it. He says, whoops, nope. Now, I don't know if he didn't like foreigners, if he figured the wife he already had would give him trouble. He just said, no, I think that would be a problem for me. It might mess up my inheritance. So Boaz says, okay then. And they go through this whole thing about taking off your sandal and giving it to the guy. Now, I have no clue why they did that, but that was to show that they came on an agreement. It's just one of those unique things in Ruth. So, Ruth and Naomi move in with Boaz. Ruth marries Boaz. She gets pregnant. And you know what? She had a little baby boy. And his name was Obed. And you know what? It says, you will appreciate this, says that the grandma took on that baby, you too, and held that baby and loved that baby. And I tell you, if they had had World's Proudest Grandma t-shirts, Naomi would have been wearing one, because Obed showed her that God hadn't forgotten her. And her life was wonderful, and Ruth and Boaz were so happy together. And that's the story of Ruth.
This has definitely been a morning for coincidence things, or actually a week. Lee started with her story of Grandma's surprise, and Janet knows that when I got the email asking if I would do prayers this morning, I think I responded saying I had 2 granddaughters there on Monday until noontime when they were joined by 2 other grandchildren who were coming with my older daughter. And a couple of times during the week, we had the one was one at the end of March. Although the 2 that came Monday morning were only there for 24 hours. However, they were there overnight. And if any of you grandparents have ever had more than 1 or 2 grandchildren for an overnight, very interesting experience. Maybe not a surprise, but and I think I responded that if by the weekend I should be recuperated, because the 2 girls that came Monday left noontime on Tuesday, and the other 2 went home around noontime on Thursday. So I have had Friday and Saturday to regroup. I don't know about any of you, either parents or grandparents or otherwise, but the energy that children between the age, especially between the ages of 9 and 11, were certainly younger. I said even when my own were that age, if I could bottle that energy and manufacture it, I would first of all take a big dose myself every day at about 3 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And if I could sell it, I would be many times over a millionaire, I am quite sure. but that's not going to happen. But the incident with the grandparents, I didn't realize that was the theme until I saw the bulletin, I think on Friday, when I finally got a chance to check the computer. And the other coincidence for me this morning, again, I hadn't realized that the scripture reading was from Ruth, which happens to be my middle name. So it's been a morning of coincidences, all of which probably have nothing or very little to do with the prayers. But it just seems strange this morning. It was just like one thing after another. As we turn our hearts to God in prayer, first of all, the prayer list that's in our bulletins each name there is special to someone. And the prayers that are needed are, we don't always know every individual. We don't know whether the needs are for healing, for strength, for comfort. In some cases, even for rejoicing. I need to mention to Georgia, I think my son's name can be removed. He's done very well from his surgery. It was not cancer, but and he's back to work. So we're very appreciative for your prayers and just rejoice in his recovery. I don't know if Dorcas had her surgery yet. Did you?
Yes, she had it Friday.
Did you?
Yeah.
Okay, so certainly keep her in your minds and in your hearts for that her recovery will go as well as possible. The other thing, names that are there, in some cases, and as I probably have already mentioned, our prayers are not always for concerns, but also for celebrations. And we do take the time to also thank God for the good things that he has done for us. Another thing that I will mention in connection with possibly joys and maybe some concerns is Mike Rieger's retirement. That for a few weeks can be a mixed bag, but it definitely is something that I'm sure he's been looking forward to, and we'll have an interesting time sorting out priorities and things that he wishes to do with that. But it's also a time that comes to many of you in life that have worked for many years at a particular job. And time for a rest, which sometimes is not always a rest. We shall see in weeks to come. So having mentioned those things, and there may be others of you that have particular concerns in your heart, and we do ask that you bring those to the Lord at this point. Let us turn our hearts to God in prayer. Our Father, we do thank you, as always, for bringing us here this morning. We thank you that you are a God of love. We thank you that you are a God who would prefer to have peace. We thank you that you are a God who welcomes each one, not just those of us sitting here this morning, but each person on the face of this earth which you have created. We thank you for your love, for your presence, for your comfort and your strength and your guidance. We know that things are not always the way we would have them. And sometimes it's for a purpose. Sometimes we just know that it's a test or a trial. And we thank you for being with us as we get through it. We think of the concerns in our own families for many needs that are there, and also for the rejoicing that's there. We need your help in our communities. Sometimes things are things to rejoice about, and sometimes there are things of concern. And it's hard to know sometimes just what you would have us do, how you would have us react, and in what way, Lord, can you use each one of us to make things better for other people. We think also in terms of our country and the challenges that are presented for each person, for many people, some so much more than others. We think especially this morning of people in Texas and the southern states that are so affected by the hurricane. We know this is something that's been dealt with before in other ways, but Lord, each time something happens, it's new. And it's new to the people perhaps that are affected. And if they've been through it before in years past, it still is new in a different way. And we ask that you would provide protection, that you would provide shelter or help to provide that you would guide the minds and the hearts of rescue workers, people that go there to support, to help, and to restore over the coming months. We ask right now that each one who is affected by that particular disaster would feel a strange warming of their hearts and a strange perhaps to some comfort in knowing that they're not dealing with it by themselves, that they're not dealing with it alone. We think of some of the political problems that are so prevalent right now. Lord, we can't begin to know the answers. I'm not even sure, Lord, if you would want us to. But we ask that you would, in some way, touch the hearts and minds of those, both those who think the same way as we do and those who don't think the same way as we do. And Lord, touch our hearts and minds to help us maybe understand or know whether it be small or large thing, what can I do? Is there something I can do? And perhaps it may only be coming to you in prayer and asking for your help, asking for your blessing in some way to make good out of a situation that at times does not seem good. Lord, we turn our hearts also to the world around us, not only in our own country, but other countries, many of whom are dealing with the same situations or similar situations to us. Some who are dealing with hardships, again, that even unlike the hurricane, are things that we can't really imagine if we're not there, if we're not living there. And as people try to get away from living situations that are unimaginable, and as they go to other countries, as was mentioned in the story of Ruth, seeking refuge, seeking help, we ask that you would be with them as they travel, with them as they journey, and with the areas that they end up in, that they would find some element of help, some element of your love. Lord, we just ask again that you would help each one of us to know what we might do. If there is something that we can do, something tangible, perhaps something intangible. And most of all, Lord, we ask that you would touch each one here this morning, each one of us, to show us in what way we might make our lives more like those of Jesus. And we'll be careful to give you the praise in his name. And amen. And now let us join together as we pray the prayer that Jesus himself did give us. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory forever. Amen.
Good morning.
I'm just going to, sorry, I'm just going to introduce you, and I wasn't sure if my mic was on. The way you're going to hear the story today is Mike is going to read most of, not all of, verses 1 to 18 of this story, the story that you heard Nancy tell. And he's going to read that straight from the New Revised Standard Version, very much as you have in your bulletin. It's a slightly different version. And Debbie is going to help us hear how the first people who heard that story, what they heard, because that's what I want to talk about in a few minutes. So Debbie is going to give you kind of the translation of the Hebrew words, and Mike reads that Bible story. Thank you.
From the book of Ruth. In the days when the judges ruled,
once upon a time that is long, long ago,
there was a famine in the land, and a certain man of Bethlehem in Judah went to live in the country of Moab, he and his wife and 2 sons.
Once upon a time, a long, 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 long time ago, there was no food in Judah. And a man and his woman and 2 sons emigrated from the town called House of Bread to that most hated of all nations, land of our greatest enemy, Moab, to live.
The name of the man was Elimelech.
The name of the man was God is my king.
And the name of his wife, Naomi.
Pleasantness. Her name was Pleasantness.
And the names of his 2 sons were Mahlon
and his 2 sons were named Sickness and Annihilation.
They were Ephrathites from Bethlehem.
House of Bread.
In Judah, they went into the country of Moab and remained there. But Elimelech,
God is my king,
the husband of Naomi,
Pleasantness,
died, and she was left with her 2 sons. These took Moab wives. The name of one was Orpah,
nape of the neck,
and the name of the other, Ruth.
The other, Friendship. They took Moabite wives, and their names were nape of the neck and Friendship.
Where they had lived there about 10 years ago, both Mahlon,
Sickness,
sickness, and Kilian,
Annihilation,
also died, so that the woman was left without her 2 sons and her husband. Then Naomi,
Pleasantness,
started to return with her daughters-in-law from the country of Moab, for she had heard in the country of Moab that the Lord had considered his people and given them food. So she set out from the place where she had been living. She and her 2 daughters-in-law, and they went on their way back to the land of Judah. But Naomi,
Pleasantness,
said to her 2 daughters-in-law, "Go back, each of you, to your mother's house. May the Lord deal kindly with you, so you have dealt with the dead and with me. The Lord grant that you may find security, each of you in the house of your husband." Then she kissed them, and they wept aloud. They said to her, "No, we will not return with you to your people." But Naomi,
Pleasantness,
said, "Turn back, my daughters." The scripture continues. Then they wept aloud again. Orpah,
nape of the neck,
kissed her mother-in-law, but Ruth,
Friendship,
clung to her. So she said, "See, your sister-in-law has gone back to her people and her gods. Return after your sister-in-law." But Ruth,
Friendship,
said, "Do not press me to leave you or turn back from following you. Where you go, I will go. Where you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, and your God, my God."
When Pleasantness,
Naomi
saw that
she was determined to go with her,
she said, "No
more to her.
So how does that story sound? Once you start to read it with those names and what those names mean. You know, the story of Ruth is a lovely story. It stands on its own as a story that we know from the Bible. But how does it sound as soon as we do what we just did, which was we listen to it with the ears of ancient Israelites hearing that story? Once upon a time, there was a woman, and her name was Pleasantness. So if the story in Ruth is kind of a history story, or it's a bit of a love story, how does it change when we hear it with those Jewish ears? Does anybody want to tell me what they think it sounds like? A fable, maybe? Suddenly it becomes a story, this kind of story you can imagine telling round a campfire. Now that story, as what happens next, just to make sure we've got the point, is as Ruth comes back to Jerusalem, the story continues like this. She said to the people as she gets back into Jerusalem, she said, "No longer call me Naomi, call me Mara. No longer call me sweetness, call me bitterness. For the Almighty has dealt bitterly with me. I went away full, but the Lord has brought me back empty. Why call me sweetness when the Lord has dealt harshly with me and the Almighty has brought calamity upon me?" In other words, stop with the sweetness stuff. I am no longer who I was. I am the very embodiment of bitterness because I have lost both my husband and then my sons. Now that is just one of the very many ironical statements in the book of Ruth. So as you see, this story is meant to be a story that kind of gets people thinking and maybe even has in its own way a kind of gentle laughter to it. The idea that there's a famine in House of Bread tells you right away that this story, there's something going on here. So this good campfire yarn has this little bit of humour, quite a bit of irony. You know, she was full, she comes back empty, lots of other of those kind of things. And all the time she's telling a story that actually denies that, right? Because here she was, she went away with 2 sons, one of whom is called Sickly, or Weakling, and the other is called Annihilation, and she comes back with a daughter-in-law called Friendship. It sounds like me that that's a far better deal altogether. I mean, the whole story is meant to kind of make you at least laugh or at least think. And when the women of Jerusalem, and I love that part, towards the end of the story, they say to her, "Your daughter-in-law is worth more to you than 7 sons," at the end of the story, just to point out that this woman's decision to be bitter, she has much to rejoice in as that story goes along. Also good for a campfire story, there's a rather coy scene at the threshing floor. Sweetness, Naomi, sends Ruth, Friendship, down to the threshing floor, as Nancy told us, and she gets to put on her very best duds and really expensive perfume to go and to talk to Boaz. Now, you know, let's say no good married woman would go down to the threshing floor. That's where, as Nancy said, that's where the partying happens at the end of the day. And what goes on the threshing floor stays on the threshing floor. You know what I mean. And when feet get uncovered in the Old Testament 9 out of 10 times, it's nothing to do with the things that you put sandals on. Okay? So this story is meant to be perfect for a late night chuckle around the campfire for the kiddies as well as for the grown-ups. It's a bit of a story. Now, those of you who know me know that what I love to do is something that people tend to call progressive theology. All it really is an attempt to see if there's something we've been missing in those old stories. We tell those stories again and again the same way. And what progressive theologians try to do is they look at this story and say, have we been missing something simply because we're not Jewish, living however many hundreds of years ago that story was written? Or in the case of Jesus, because we're not Jewish people living in the Middle East 2,000 years ago. Is there something to this story that we miss simply because our context is different? And that's what I love to do. I love to dig into these stories and see, okay, let's look at the time and place. Is there something else we've been missing? It doesn't say the other story's wrong, or what the messages of those stories are not valid. It just says here's something new maybe that might add some understanding to what's going on. So this story is a little bit of history. And I know that not everybody likes history, but you're not going to understand what's going on unless you know it, all right? So I'm going to tell you just a little bit, just enough to get you by. This story says, long, long ago in the time when the judges judged, is how the Hebrew begins. Okay, once upon a time, long ago. So immediately we know it's a story that is not about the time it's written, it's about the past. And it's actually talking about the period about 1000 BCE, that's 3,000 years ago, but it was actually written down 500 or 600 years later. So somewhere around maybe 500 BCE, 500 years before Jesus, there was something very interesting happening with the Jewish people. The Jewish people had been repeatedly taken into exile. Their country had been overrun by all kinds of people. So now, just to make you even more annoyed, because I'm going to make you do some history, I'm going to add some geography to it, because I've found that people who don't like history usually don't like geography either. And here's your map. Here's your geography. So this is a map of the Middle East around the time of when this story was written. As you see, 540 BCE, it's just about there, about 500 BC, probably the story was written. And what you can see here is a very big empire called Persia, and you can see the second Babylonian, the Neo-Babylonian Empire. You've got Egypt on the left. The area at the top left, I put Greece on it just so that you know where you are in the Mediterranean. And if you look really, really careful, because I actually marked it in black, you will see the land we're talking about. Can you see just in between the word Judah on the left in the bottom of that kind of maroon-coloured part, and there's the word Jerusalem, and in between is a little tiny black smudge, and that is the land of Israel. That's what all these stories are about, that little tiny patch of land right there. It's not very big. It's not important. You've got mighty Egypt. You've got the massive Persian Empire. We're going to talk about that in a minute. Jerusalem is, and the words Jerusalem and Judah there are actually bigger than the piece of land we're talking about. So why on earth did everybody always seem to be attacking this little tiny country? Because you know that the Persian Empire is going to have a lot more money, and Egypt's going to have a lot more money, and Babylon's going to have a lot more money than that little tiny country. And the reason is where it is. Because that little country is surrounded by hills, and there's rivers, and there's lakes, and if you're mighty Persia, and you want to get to that wealth of the now kind of in decay Egyptian Empire, you're going to end up coming down through Assyria, and down and right through Judah. And Judah is your last chance to camp your army before you go into the desert to get to Egypt. So you've got some nice, you've got the plain of Megiddo near Jerusalem, which is where we get the word Armageddon. You've got the plain there, you put your army there, and you've got fertile land, you can feed your army, you get them all built up, and then off they go through the desert to Egypt. And if the Egyptians want to fight the Assyrians, they do the same thing. They travel through the desert, their soldiers are tired and they're hungry, and so they camp in the plain of Megiddo, and they get nice figs and olives, and they feed themselves up around it. So what you do on the way is you just lay waste to Jerusalem, because why wouldn't you? It's there and your soldiers. So poor little Israel, again and again, has crowds of people coming through, and later it was the Greeks and the Romans, and they're the people who were there when Jesus was there, through this little territory. Little tiny territory. And when they came through, these soldiers, they would say, oh look, able-bodied men, let's take them as slaves to build our buildings. So occasionally when Syria came through, and then Persia came through, Babylon came through, they would take the able-bodied people back to their nation to build their huge, fantastic structures. But not everybody would be taken, because they didn't take the sick. They didn't take a lot of the females. Some would stay behind, and that's very important for our story. So this story is set at a time when, once again, Israel's land has been devastated. The temple, we're told, is in total ruins. They have been dragged off into Babylon, and then along comes mighty Persia and overruns Babylon. Babylon is the city in white, right almost in the middle. And the new king is called Cyrus the Great. And Cyrus was a pretty good political operative, because he has now got this huge nation that comprised of Persia and Babylonia, And he's got slaves from all over the place. And he says, you know what, I'm going to make friends. He says to them, I'll tell you what, you can all go home. Go home to your own countries, and I'll even give you money to rebuild. So this period in the history of Jerusalem is called the Reconstruction, because Cyrus the Great sent them home with money to reconstruct their land. And that was a very interesting time. And we know about it because we've also got other books of the Bible written at the same time. We've got the prophet Nehemiah and the prophet Ezra. And they came back from Babylon and they were like, let's make a holy land. We are going to make the most holy land that God has ever seen. It's going to all be run God's way, which was all very good, except that little country now was full of the people who didn't go. And the people who didn't go had brought in people from round about. Why wouldn't you? It's a very fertile little country. And so other people had moved in. And now the country wasn't full of people who followed Yahweh God, Israelites. It's full of people who've married people from just across the river in what used to be called Moab. And on there, tiny, again tiny, but under the word, around the word Jerusalem, there's a little dotted circle that I drew. That's actually the size of Moab. It was no longer called Moab by the time the story was written, but they were looking back to the old days when Moab was the great enemy because they're just across the river. Okay? So, that's when this story is set. So what you've got a nation who want to be super holy, super focused on the laws of God, and you've got a whole load of people who are not from the Israelite background, and they've been living there all along, and they just like things the way they are, thank you very much. They've done without the temple, they don't need the temple. And along comes some prophets and say, no, we've got to become more holy. So this is what you're going to do. Throw away your foreign wives. The words in Nehemiah and Ezra again and again are, send your foreign wives back home. And so somebody decides to tell a story. They tell the story of Ruth. And she's going to be very important, who she is later. But they decide to tell the story of Ruth, who was one of those hated foreign wives. So there you go. So you can go back to the other image now, so people don't have to look at that geography for any longer, but I hope that kind of gives you an idea. So in this story, I mean, I just find this fascinating. So in this story, Ruth, of course, hooks up with Boaz, and you'll not be surprised to know his name means sturdy. He's sturdy, he's dependable, right? And the book, of course, is called after Ruth, but the person really who has the most lines, and I think the person who's really the kind of main person in the story, is in fact Naomi. Sweetness. There are hints in this story that knowing that what is going on in the land of Judah, that Naomi does not want to take Ruth back with her. When there's that pleading scene, and it goes on a little bit longer, we've made it shorter just for the reading, and before Orpah, nape of the neck, shows her nape of the neck and heads off in the opposite direction, it's very clear that Ruth does not really want to take, Naomi does not really want to take Ruth back with her, because she knows that in her land, in the story, she will not be welcome. And that Naomi herself may have a harder time surviving if she brings a foreign woman with her. So this story is uncomfortable at various levels, right? Because here's Naomi now, who's alone and feeling very bitter, but now she's actually got to make excuses for bringing back the foreigner with her. And we know that's a little bit of a story, because if you read the kind of between the lines, if you read what's going on in the fields, you know, people are starting to pick on Ruth a little bit. You know, why have we got this foreigner here? Even though that's in fact why all that wheat was supposed to be left for widows, orphans, and foreigners. So we know there's some uncomfortable stuff going on. There's been a call for racial, ethnic, religious purity and Ruth is not it. It's a time of distrust, maybe hatred of all foreigners and immigrants were being blamed by most people for not keeping the law and for making the people of Israel behave in ungodly ways. So someone from the opposition, as I say, wrote this story. There's nothing new about blaming immigrants for unwelcome changes, of course, or even if things don't change quick enough. The Irish in the later 1800s were horrendously picked on. The Italians, of course, around the 1900s. Japanese and German around the time of the Second World War. And now I hardly need to name them to you who is being picked on right now. You can fill in those blanks. The story of Ruth was aiming to remind the people of Jerusalem from 500 years before Jesus of the role of immigrants in their community, in their own history, just as people in the middle of the last century tried to remind wartime Americans that those German Jews had brought with them the nuclear technology that, had it stayed in Germany, would have meant a nuclear bomb dropping here instead of Japan. The story of Ruth reminded them of their history, and as such it's still very relevant today. The Moabites were Israel's most hated enemy because they were descended from the incestuous relationship between Lot and his daughters. Lot was the cousin of Moses. They were so hated that Israelites said that one of their descendants could not enter the temple even after many, many generations. That's how despised they were, hated, anathema. And the story of Ruth puts that story on its head. You know, Lee's story at the beginning was a bit of a play on words, just like so much of this story is. And we had that title of Surprising Grandma. It's not there right now. But of course, because she was a grandma who was being surprised, right? It's how you surprise grandma. You jump out of a box. But of course, the real story in the story in the Book of Ruth is about a very surprising grandma, or at least a great-grandma. And if we go back to the other slide now, at the end of the Book of Ruth, and again in the Gospel of Matthew, there are genealogies. You know, the things we all like to ignore. When I was a kid, it was always somebody begat, somebody begat, somebody begat, and they were always names that were impossible and nobody knew how to say them. Well, at the end of Ruth, there's a genealogy. And that genealogy was so important that the early church repeated it. And we see it in the book of Matthew. If I just read that to you, I'm not going to read a long genealogy. We're not going to, you know, it is actually the very beginning of the book. In Matthew 1, it says, Matthew, the Gospel of Matthew begins an account of the genealogy of Jesus, the Messiah, the son of David, the son of Abraham. Abraham was the father of Isaac, and Isaac the father of Jacob, and Jacob the father of Judah and his brothers, and Judah the father of Perez and Zerah by Tamar, and Perez the father of Hezron, and Hezron the father of Aram, and Aram the father of Abinadab. Are you still awake? I'm getting there. Keep awake. And Abinadab the father of Nahshon, and Nahshon the father of Salmon, and Salmon the father of Boaz by Rahab, and Obed, the father of Jesse, and Jesse, the father of King David. Ruth is the grandma, the great-grandma, of the great King David. David, the great hero of the Jewish faith. David, the man from whom the line of the Messiah would have to come. So Ruth is the ancestor of Jesus. A detested foreigner, the very worst kind, a poor widow without a protector or income, forced to glean in a field, to beg, to ask for help, to go down to the threshing floor in all her fancy doves, to find a husband, a woman who had to connive to get what she needed for security. Was Ruth the Moabite, without whom there is no King David. The author is saying, don't be so quick to throw out those foreign wives. And Ruth is only one of those in the Old Testament. There are actually 2 more in that list I just read. Don't throw away your foreign wives. Don't listen to what those other prophets are saying, because those foreigners have made us who we are today. At a time when there are Americans calling for racial purity, it is a great reminder that we are who we are, not by being separate and alone and apart, but by celebrating the good that it is in us all, and the way we are all part of one great family, with all its diversity. A reminder that immigrants can and will go on to be tremendous assets sooner or later, and we will never know. A reminder that no race has a monopoly on goodness or faithfulness, godliness or godfulness. The story of Ruth, when we put it in its context, within its history, within its geography, has a message for us today far beyond one of personal morality, though it's good to be nice and loyal and faithful like Ruth was. It's certainly, no, we're not saying that's not the case. But there's also this other story that is far beyond personal morality. It's a message for us as citizens of the world, a message for humanity, that God is God of all, and we are one family. Amen. Let's see what happens next. Oh, I think I've got it here. No, maybe not. Is it, what happens? Who's got a bulletin there? Thank you. I put it down somewhere in my travels. Oh, thank you, it's Debbie. Debbie came because it's Debbie.
Sorry, I guess I was just caught in the story and hearing it differently. Thank you. And so now it is time to bring forth the tithes and the offerings. And also at this time, if people would like to take a moment and sign the fellowship pads that are at the end of the pews, filling those in with, your name and that you were here and any prayer concerns that you might have, so that we can add them to our concerns in the weeks to come. So often we hear follow the money, and we hear, whether it's individually, you make your decisions according to what that will bring you, or it's investigative, follow the money to figure out what's happened. And here, dear God, we pray that this money will follow you, that it will bring about, help to bring about the love and justice and peace that you envision. Amen.
Good morning. I'm Ron Bergen. We've got I just was handed 3 pages of announcements, so my announcements that I've got and the announcements I just are going to handle, I'm going to try to merge them together. But if they repeat, it'll be good for the soul. And as our tagline says, we're on a journey together with Christ, questioning, serving, and growing. And I've got all sorts of things this morning for us on all of those. So first off, somebody reminded me that Rosa celebrated her 90th birthday recently. She's in the back. So happy birthday. The other thing that has not been mentioned yet is in the bulletin, they're doing a survey of the new format, and you're able to provide feedback. So that's lurking in your bulletin pages in the middle there somewhere. Also, let's see, the leadership team is going to meet on Thursday the 31st at 7 o'clock. The topic is the block party, so if anybody would like to come and also help organize the block party, that would be a time to get together. Again, that's this Thursday, isn't it? Wow, August is almost over, 7 o'clock. There's also a special campaign to raise funds for a church secretary. We need to raise about $9,000 for that to be able to complete through this, have someone start for the rest of 2017. There's not money in our budget for this at the current time. So we've got that. If there's questions or concerns about that, see Christine McDonald. September 9th is a work party here. There will be pizza this time. There's not a time on this, and I'm trying to remember. I think we're starting at 10. Is it 9? Is it 10? I was thinking it was either 9 or 10, so it would be 10 o'clock on the 9th. There's also, Pastor Judy is starting up a, what is it? What she calls it here? Or organized preschool kind of thing with preschoolers coming in. That's on September 7th, and she's looking for some help on that. They're still also looking for some help for the Tuesday night free meal offered in our church by the Ida Baptist. Suzanne is kind of helping organize that. Churros, not in our bulletin this week, but obviously the next, what is that, looks like the 16th, the 23rd, the 24th, the 30th, and the August 8th, with the September 24th being the block party, is all involved in churros. That's been a huge fundraiser for us this year. And speak to Paul on that one. Thank you for Joyce Pascal hosting coffee hour on September 3rd. There's opportunities to host the coffee hour. If you get your email, if you're on the email distribution, there was also several opportunities in that. And this is where I may repeat some of the stuff. There's a meet and greets with the pastor. We're starting to organize small groups meeting with Pastor Judy, sort of a chance to meet her to meet you. There's at least 2 that are up on the window or on the bulletin board for sign-ups on those dates and times. There's other small groups that are being organized. I know Nancy and I are hosting one. We have to figure out our calendars at Snowman's if you're into ice cream. But not a date yet on that. There's also John Dominic Crossan is going to be speaking at First United Methodist Church in Schenectady. That's on September 23rd. I've mentioned coffee hour, churros, the newsletter that we get. We're also looking for somebody to be the editor on that, and Jillian will train you as to what needs to be done on that. And I think I'm done with my things, and now I have to find the one that tells me what's coming up next, because I did write it down. It is, the Spirit will send us forth to serve. It's number 2241. I didn't know which hymnal it is, but the words will be up on the screen. Thank you.
Bring the tidings to the poor.
So go in Jesus' name, empowered. Go and spread the love of Jesus, and remember the stories in the Bible have got so many interesting ways of going and then finding out new things and things that are relevant to us even today. Even these Old Testament stories, there's a great joy to be found in the stories of the Bible, but also great inspiration. And so go in God's name to proclaim the love of God and the peace of God and the justice of God wherever you go. Amen.